February 11, 1945, inside an American POW camp, a German officer freezes at the sight of a slice of ham in a chocolate bar. He doesn't know it yet, but within minutes. This simple meal will shatter everything he ever believed about the war and about Germany itself. Section 1. The First Meal in America. February 11th, 1945. Camp Aliceville, Alabama. The rain has not stopped since dawn. It drums on the corrugated metal roof of the mess hall like distant artillery. A steady, hollow roar that fills the long, low building. The air smells of wet wood, steam, and something else thick, savory, unfamiliar. You can almost taste it before you see it. Hauptmann Karl Weber stands in the doorway, boots leaving small, dark prints on the concrete threshold. His gray field coat, stripped of shoulder boards, is still marked by dried mud from the Ardennes. The chain of his dog tag clings coldly to the back of his neck. Around him, dozens of German officers shuffle forward in a subdued line, their breath visible in the cool air. Across the hall, American military policemen in khaki and olive drab move with an ease that feels offensive somehow. Their uniforms are clean, their cheeks are full. One of them actually laughs as he swings a tin coffee pot up onto a long wooden table. Carl's eyes are drawn past the MPs to the center of the room. Tables, row after row. Each one lined with trays. Metal trays. And on those trays meat, he blinks, thinking his eyes are playing tricks on him after weeks of watery soup and black bread. But no, it is unmistakable. Thick, pinkish slices of canned ham. Brown gravy pooling at the edges. A mound of mashed potatoes, pale and fluffy. Green beans, dull and wrinkled, but undeniably vegetables. A square of something chocolate brown and glossy sitting in a small paper wrapper like a treasure. Beside him, Oberstleutnant Friedrich Albrecht lets out a low breath. Flash, he murmurs. Zum for HSTC sick nicked Aber. Zummitig. Not for breakfast, but. For lunch, Karl swallows. The last proper chunk of meat he remembers eating had been on Christmas Eve, 1944. In a freezing cellar near Bostonthon, slices from a scrawny pig the company had requisitioned from a deserted farm. Before that, it had been months of ersatz sausage, gray and rubbery, and tins of something that called itself meat. It could have been anything. The line shuffles forward. The mess hall echoes with clatter and voices. American cooks in stained aprons stand behind the counter, ladles in hand, steam curling around their faces. They look like men who live in a world where food is a nuisance, not a question of survival. One yawns as he scoops mashed potatoes onto a passing tray. Keep it moving, fellas, an MP calls. Not harsh, just brisk. Karl feels the line push him ahead. The German officers are quiet, eyes wide, shoulders hunched more from uncertainty than cold. These are men who have commanded battalions, who have watched men die today. They stare at mashed potatoes. He reaches the counter. Next. Snaps a voice in English. The cook in front of him is broad-shouldered, freckles fading into a reddish beard. His name tag reads Harris. Looks at Karl with a kind of bored curiosity. You a captain? He asks, glancing at the remnants of insignia on Karl's coat sleeve. Karl hesitates, then nods once. Yeah. Yes. Harris shrugs. Food's the same for everybody today, Captain. He plunks a slice of ham onto the tray with a wet slap. Gravy follows. A heap of potatoes, steam rising. Green beans. A square of dark chocolate. Then, with a practiced motion, he reaches behind him and sets down a white ceramic mug. Coffee sloshes inside, dark and fragrant. The smell hits Karl like a memory. Real coffee. Not roasted barley or burned chicory, but the sharp, bitter aroma of actual beans. He had almost forgotten. Harris' ladle hovers. You want more gravy? Karl looks up. The cook's face is open, indifferent. As if this is normal. As if they are not enemies in a world at war. He manages 9. It is enough. Suit yourself, Harris says, and moves on to the next POW. Karl steps aside, tray trembling slightly in his hands. Fried potatoes would have been surprising. Meat is astonishing. But the chocolate? He stares at the little brown square. simple, wrapped with the words U.S. Army Field Ration Chocolate, printed in small, precise letters. You see this? Albrecht appears at his elbow, balancing his own tray in thin, bony hands. His eyes, sunken from months at the front, are suddenly bright. Chocolade. Ganz offen. Chocolate. In the open, their boots ring on the concrete floor as they walk to an empty table. The sound is swallowed by the din of eating. Forks scrape metal. Chairs creak. Somewhere, a radio plays faint swing music. Music, American, jaunty. Completely out of place in Carl's internal landscape of ruined villages and shell-torn forests. They sit for a moment. Neither man moves. Carl's fingers find the fork automatically. Habit from another life. He cuts the ham. The texture is soft, yielding, a little too salty. When he puts it in his mouth, it is almost overwhelming, the richness, the fat, the warmth. It is not gourmet, not even particularly good by the standards of the officers' mess before the war, but compared to the thin, oily broth of the last months, it might as well be a feast. He chews slowly, jaw tight, as if afraid the bite will vanish if he moves too quickly. Across the table, Albrecht's hand hovers over his chocolate, then withdraws. Spader, he mutters. Later, as if saving it might somehow save something else time. Memory control. Carl takes a sip of coffee. It is strong, slightly burnt, but hot and real. The warmth spreads through his chest in a way that feels almost indecent. He hears the scrape of chairs. 2 American soldiers sit down at the far end of the same table. The trays piled high, they wear the same khaki, the same boots, the same helmets that he has watched through binoculars, through gun sights. Their rifles are stacked neatly against the wall behind them. One pulls a pack of cigarettes from his breast pocket, Lucky Strikes, and taps one out with lazy familiarity. As Carl watches, the American tears open his chocolate bar, takes a bite, and grimaces. Same damn stuff every day. He complains to his buddy. Spam, Spuds, and Hershey. I swear I'm going to turn into a can of C-rations. His friend laughs, mouth full. Beats Karats in the Ardennes, pal. At least it's hot here. They talk about home. About gasoline prices. About a girl in Ohio who writes every week. Their words mean little to Carl, but the tone casual, bored. Uninterested in food as anything but routine, pounds in his ears. Same stuff every day. He looks down at his tray. Meat. Potatoes, vegetables, chocolate, coffee. He thinks of the letters from his wife Anna, describing ration cards in Stuttgart. The lines for bread, the butter saved for the child's birthday. He remembers sergeants breaking open crates at the front only to find fewer tins than before. The quiet disappointment that spread through the ranks like cold. Here, an American soldier complains about too much food. Albrecht leans closer, voice barely above the hum of the hall. If this is what the guards eat, he whispers, imagine what their factories must be producing. He nods subtly toward the serving line, where more trays are being filled. More meat is being laid out like it will never end. Carl doesn't answer, because in that moment, as the rain beats on the roof and swing music crackles from the radio, he feels something he has not allowed himself to feel since the war began. Not fear. He has known fear for years, not shame. That has been his shadow for months. Know what wells up inside him? Sitting over a plate of American Army rations is a cold, heavy realization that settles into his bones like winter. We have been lied to. He picks up the chocolate. The wrapper crackles softly as he peels it back. Section 2. The taste of chocolate and the cracks. In the story, the chocolate is harder than he expects. Carl presses his thumb against the corner, feeling the slight resistance. The faint bloom on its surface from sitting in some warehouse, somewhere over the sea. Then he brings it to his mouth and bites sweetness. Not overwhelming, grainy, bit chalky but sweet, in a way that feels almost obscene after so many months of bitter chicory and stale bread. Sugar, real sugar, fills his mouth, cutting through the salt of the ham and the bitterness of the coffee. For a second, he closes his eyes. The noise of the mess hall fades. He is back at his mother's kitchen table in Freiburg. Age 10, watching her break a chocolate bar into 4 perfect squares, one for each child. She had smiled and said, "Langsam essen. Man weighs nie, one ease das, naxt mal gibt." Eat slowly. You never know when there will be more. Now, in 1945 Alabama, he thinks. Here. It is every day. He opens his eyes. Albrecht is still staring at his own chocolate. Fingers hovering as if he is not sure he is allowed to touch it. "Probier ease," Carl says quietly. "Try it." The older man hesitates, then peels back the wrapper and brings the bar to his lips. His jaw works. For a moment, lines of age, fatigue, and defeat fall away from his face. "Mein Gott," he mutters. "They give this to soldiers." "Every day," Carl repeats, glancing unconsciously toward the Americans at the far end of the table. One of them has already finished his meat and is sawing into his chocolate with his teeth. He's barely paying attention. The radio in the corner crackles. A band swings into a brassy number trumpet, saxophone, drums. Someone turns up the volume. The room hums with conversation, with the metallic clink of forks. With the low rumble of men finally warm and fed, for the first time since entering the camp, the Germans begin to talk like men again, not prisoners. "You think this is special treatment?" One asks from another table, voice edged with suspicion. "Propaganda for us? They would not waste so much meat just to impress a few officers," another replies. "Look at the guards. They eat the same." Earning a few strained chuckles, Carl lets the noise wash over him. His mind is somewhere else, on speeches in smoky rooms, on newsreels shown in requisitioned cinemas, on the careful baritone voice that had told them again and again, the enemy is decadent. The enemy is weak. Their society is collapsing. Their industry is brittle. He had believed it. Or at least he had wanted to. A bell rings near the doorway. An American officer in olive drab steps onto a small wooden platform, clipboard in hand. His rank insignia gleams on his shoulder. "Captain." He clears his throat, and gradually the hall quiets. "All right, gentlemen," he begins in accented but careful German. "My name is Captain Robert Miller. I am the liaison officer for this camp." Ed's turn. Forks pause halfway to mouths. "You are prisoners of war under the custody of the United States Army," Miller continues. "You will be treated in accordance with the Geneva Convention. That includes medical care, the right to correspondence with your families, and rations equivalent to our own troops." He lets that last phrase hang in the air for a moment. "Equivalent," Albrecht whispers, almost to himself. "Nicht schlechter," not worse. Miller goes on, outlining camp rules, work duties, restrictions. No escape attempts. No sabotage. No political agitation. Any infractions will be punished. But his tone never rises. He speaks as a man explaining factory regulations, not as a victor gloating. Carl watches his mouth move, understands the words. But underneath it all, another sentence beats in his skull like a drum. Rations equivalent to our own troops. This ham, potatoes, vegetables, coffee. Chocolate's not a show. This is normal. When the speech is over, the officer steps down. The noise gradually returns, though it is different now, more fragmented, less certain. Men speak in low clusters, heads bent close together. They always had more. Someone mutters behind Carl, "You remember in Normandy? The air, the tanks. Now we see the food." Ah. Another says, "America is big, yes, but big does not mean strong. They are soft. They complain about everything." Carl thinks of the soldier earlier, grumbling about spam. Feels a hollow laugh rise in his throat. Soft. He has seen American boys charge machine guns at Hirchen. He has watched their artillery flatten forests that had withstood centuries of storms. Soft is not the word he would use. He finishes his coffee. The mug is heavy, comforting in his hand. As the meal winds down, an MP claps his hands. "All right, Krauts, let's go. Line up and move out." There is no malice in his voice-only routine. The men rise, trays clattering. They file toward the exit, dropping their dishes in large gray bins where kitchen staff will wash them for the next cycle. Outside, the rain has slowed to a fine drizzle. The Alabama sky is a uniform sheet of dull silver. The camp stretches ahead: barracks, wire fences, guard towers. The muddy yard between. They walk in formation, 2 by 2, flanked by MPs with slung M1 carbines. Boots suck at the wet ground. The food sits heavy but pleasant in their stomachs. As they pass the kitchen building, a truck backs up to a loading bay. The tailgate rattles, and 2 American soldiers jump down to pull it open. Boxes, dozens of them. Stacked high, stenciled with words in English that Carl can only half read, me AT, canned, rations, coffee, sugar. One crate splits, a corner giving way. A pyramid of chocolate bars spills out, tumbling over each other in a cascade of brown wrappers. The American driver swears and laughs, waving over a companion to pick them up. He scoops 2 into his pocket when he thinks no one is looking. Carl does look. He cannot help it. An MP notices his gaze and grins. "Don't worry, Captain," he says in halting German. "There is myrrh. Plenty for everybody." The word hangs there plenty as alien as the swing music. Plenty as they are herded back toward the barracks. The smell of chocolate and coffee still lingering in the damp air, Carl feels something shifting inside him. It is not sudden, not dramatic, just a small movement, like earth settling under a heavy weight. The first crack in a statue, the first hairline fracture in a story told too many times. He does not yet think the word. Doomed. That will come later, with trains and miles of factory windows and airfields full of bombers. For now, there is only the lingering taste of chocolate on his tongue and the quiet, relentless question he cannot push away. If this is how they feed their prisoners, how do they feed their armies? Section 3. The train ride that changed everything. March 2nd, 1945. Somewhere in Mississippi, the whistle screams like a wounded as the transport train lurches forward, grinding against the rails. Chains clink. Boots shuffle. The wind whips through the gaps in the wooden slats of the cattle car, carrying with it the smell of wet pine, diesel, and spring earth inside. More than 40 German POs sway with the movement of the train officers. NCOs, a handful of young infantrymen, barely old enough to shave. Carl stands near a narrow window, hands tucked into the pockets of his coat, watching the American countryside roll by in long, hypnotic stretches. The guards had said only one thing that morning: relocation, new camp. But as the train gathers speed, the landscape begins to change. Small farms give way to larger fields, then 2 clusters of concrete structures and long, low warehouses. Smoke rises from chimneys tall enough to dwarf the treetops. Railway spurs branch outward like veins. Carl presses closer to the window. Was Ist das? Someone behind him murmurs. He does not answer, because what he is seeing is impossible. In Germany, trains carry wounded soldiers, refugees, fuel, whatever scraps the Reich can still move. Here they pass train after train loaded with crates stacked so high they seem ready to spill, as well as flat cars carrying tanks. Actual tanks, gleaming with fresh paint. Their gun barrels wrapped in canvas. One flat car holds 4 of them, the next holds 3, then another and another. Then the warehouses appear vast, rectangular, stretching for what must be kilometers. Smoke pours from the stacks. Windows glow with the dull orange of furnaces. Long lines of trucks sit by loading docks, engines idling. Forklifts buzz like insects. Carl feels breath leave him. Albrecht steps up beside him, his face pale. Herrgott. The older officer whispers, "Das ist Unfabrstadt." A factory city. The train slows, not stops, just slows enough that the prisoners can take in every horrible, magnificent detail. On a siding, American workers in denim overalls guide Sherman tanks down ramps. Sparks burst from welding stations. A crane lifts a turret like a child picks up a toy. No one seems exhausted. No one is starving. Every man moves with the casual focus of someone His greatest worry is overtime pay. Carl grips the wooden slat. 2 weeks earlier, he had stared at a chocolate bar in disbelief. Now he is staring at the reason that chocolate exists, not decadence, not softness, not excess. Power, industrial power so vast it feels like an ocean. Endless and indifferent. The train rattles forward again. The prisoners drift back from the window in stunned silence, but Carl stays. He cannot look away. The warehouses break, replaced by a long airfield. And on that airfield, dash bombers dot dozens, maybe 100, B-24 Liberators in neat rows, their silver skins gleaming in the sun. A few mechanics move between them, tiny in comparison, tightening bolts, checking engines. Farther down the runway, B-17s sit with their bellies open, bombs being winched inside by teams of workers. And then he sees the most terrifying thing of all. An entire row of bombers, perfect, pristine, engines wrapped in canvas, just sitting there, ready, waiting, as if America can build them faster than they can fly them. Carl had heard rumors at the front. Enemy propaganda, they said. Exaggerations, lies. But here, through a train window in Mississippi, is the truth. The United States is producing war the way farmers produce grain. Albrecht leans forward, eyes locked on the bombers. They have so many, he whispers. More than they need. Carl nods, throat tight. The train turns. For a moment, the prisoners get a final view of the runway sunlight. It's glinting off a forest of metal wings. Then the train curves past a stand of trees, and the airfield disappears. Silence settles inside the car. The kind of silence that comes after a revelation. It's large for words. Finally, someone in the back mutters, voice trembling, if they feed prisoners like soldiers, and build tanks by the hundreds, and have airfields like that, then how could we ever have one? No one answers, because they all know the answer. Carl closes his eyes, dot the chocolate bar, the overflowing crates, the smell of freshly brewed coffee, the endless tanks, the bombers, lined up like cattle, pieces of a puzzle, clicking one by one into place. Not decadence, not waste, capacity. Capacity measured, not in luxuries, but in inevitability. The train rattles on toward its destination. A new camp, a new routine, new lectures about Geneva rules and work, assignments, but none of that matters now, not after what they have seen. Carl opens his eyes again. Looking out at the receding world, we never stood a chance, he says softly. No one disagrees. Section 4. The cigarette that broke the illusion. March 7th, 1945, Camp Shelby, Mississippi. The sun is warm today, warm in a way Carl had almost forgotten sunlight could feel. Not the thin, watery winter light of Europe. Not the dull gray glow filtered through smoke and the damp misery of frontline trenches. This is American sunlight. Bright, full-bodied, most arrogant in its confidence. The prisoners stand in formation in the yard, boots sinking into soft red clay. The guard tower watches over them, with the unbothered vigilance of a place that has never seen real danger. A few American MPs lean against the rails, rifles resting casually in their hands. Carl adjusts his cap. He is still thinking about the bombers. He hasn't stopped thinking about them. Neither has anyone else in the barracks. In the latrines, in the yard, during work detail, they whisper, hundreds, maybe thousands. And the tanks. Maine got the tanks. The industrial city they passed that day had shattered something inside every German officer on that train. It had driven a splinter straight through the propaganda they had carried, like armor for years. Today, that splinter drives a little deeper. The roll call ends. The prisoners begin dispersing toward work assignments, kitchen duty, laundry, lumberyard, agricultural plots. Carl is assigned to help with grounds maintenance for the officers' quarters. A mild job. A quiet one. He prefers the quiet as they walk. An MP with a square jaw and sunburned cheeks approaches, flipping a small cardboard box in his fingers, Captain Weber, he says. Mispronouncing Weber as Weber, you smoke? Carl hesitates. Yeah. Yes. The MP taps out a cigarette and holds it out. The smell hits Carl before he even touches it sweet. Rich, unmistakable. Carl asks. The MP snorts. American tobacco. Carl accepts the cigarette carefully, like he's holding something fragile and rare. He hasn't had a real tobacco cigarette since early, 1944. The Wehrmacht had long since turned to paper-thin cuts of ersatz, tobacco harsh, bitter, more straw than leaf. This is different, real. The MP flicks a lighter. The flame blossoms with a soft metallic snap as Carl inhales. The first breath of smoke floods his lungs with warmth and flavor, heavy and smooth. His head swims for a moment from the shock of it. Gut qualit, he murmurs. Best in the world, the MP says proudly. Then he tilts his head. You guys weren't getting stuff like this back home, huh? Carl exhales slowly. 9. Nothing like this. The MP laughs. Hell, even our worst brands are better than what my cousin smokes in Chicago. Want a pack? Carl stiffens. A pack? The MP shrugs and gestures toward a wooden crate sitting by the steps of the officers' quarters. The lid is open. Inside are dozens, no, hundreds of cigarette packs. Camels, Lucky Strikes, Chesterfields, Pall Mall, all stacked casually like onions in a pantry. Carl's breath catches. How? How many? He asks before he can stop himself. The MP smiles. This. Just for the week. Just for the week. Carl's knees feel weak. In Germany, entire companies had shared a single pack. Cigarettes had become currency worth more than bread. Men had traded watches, boots, even rations for a few thin sticks of ersatz tobacco. And here, a week's worth fills a crate. The MP grabs 5 packs and tosses them casually into a duffel bag. You want one? He offers. Carl looks again at the crate. At the endless rows of American brands, at the luxury his captors treat as mundane, he shakes his head slowly. No. Thank you. One is enough. The MP shrugs. Suit yourself, Captain. If you change your mind, there's more where that came from. He pats the crate lightly. There's always more. The words echo. More. Always more. Not just cigarettes, not just chocolate, not just meat. Tanks, bombers, trucks, uniforms, fuel, food, everything. Carl stands. Very still as the MP walks away, humming a swing tune under his breath. Around him, the camp is alive with its usual activity. Posts hauling lumber, guards chatting, a cook tossing scraps to a wandering dog, another crate of rations being unloaded from a truck, stamped with labels that once again remind him. This is normal for them. He takes another drag of the cigarette. Smoke curls upward into the bright. American Sky Albrecht approaches quietly. His face is drawn and thoughtful. You saw the crate? He asks. Carl nods. Albrecht folds his arms. When I was a young man, he begins, our instructors taught us that industrial power decides wars more than bravery. I believed it, but I never understood it. Not truly. He looks at the cigarette in Carl's hand. Now I understand. Carl flicks ash to the ground. How long, he asks softly, do you think Germany can continue to fight? Albrecht gives a small, sad smile. With what we have seen, says. Not long. The breeze carries the scent of tobacco and spring flowers, and for the first time, Carl lets himself think the thought he has avoided since the train ride. This war is lost. Not because German soldiers were cowardly, not because the Allies were superhuman, but because the Reich had entered a contest of production, endurance, and resources. And the United States had been playing in an entirely different league. Carl takes one last drag, then crushes the cigarette under his boot. His hands linger at his sides, his shoulders. Lower just slightly. The illusion is breaking. Section 5. Letters Home and the Quiet. Realization. March 15th, 1945. Barracks 12. Camp Shelby. Rain patters softly on the tin roof. A steady metallic whisper that echoes through the cramped wooden room. The smell of wet canvas, wool blankets, and laundry soap fills the air. A single bare light bulb dangles from the ceiling, casting long shadows across the rows of bunk beds where German officers sit hunched over small wooden tables. Today is mail day for many of them. It is the only tether left to the world they once knew. Carl sits on the lower bunk, the thin mattress pressing against his shoulders as he unfolds the letter in his trembling hands. Carl, we are safe. The bombings have grown worse. Bread is rationed. Butter is almost impossible to find. Your mother stands in line every morning. His wife's handwriting dips and curves in familiar, comforting strokes, but every word is a knife. They say the Americans are decadent. But if they are decadent, then why is there so little here? Why is everything scarce? Why do we queue for hours for food that is gone before we reach the door? Carl lowers the paper, staring blankly at the wood grain of the table. Across from him, Albrecht reads his own letter. His jaw tightens. His fingers whiten around the paper. They write of hunger, the older man murmurs. Of cold, of shortages. The bombs fall every night. And here we sit, eating meat. He laughs bitterly. Meat around them. Other officers read their letters with the numb silence of men absorbing blows. They cannot deflect. Someone curses under his breath. Someone wipes at his eyes. Another simply crumples his letter slowly, deliberately, then presses it flat again, as if trying to fix the world by smoothing paper. Carl returns to the letter. They say, we must endure, that victory will come. But the women whisper that the Americans have more of everything. More food, more machines, more planes. They say the factories in Stuttgart can barely run anymore. There is no fuel. His heart twists. No fuel, no heat, no supplies. He closes his eyes. And the airfield from the train ride rises before him, again rows upon rows of bombers. Each one drinking fuel like a living thing. Each one swallowing tons of bombs as casually as a soldier eats. Breakfast. His wife's words land with brutal clarity. Weimar ration cards. Standing in line. Bombs falling. America. With more than it knows what to do with, a young lieutenant in the next bunk breaks the silence. Why did they lie to us? He whispers. No one answers. Not yet. The door opens. An American MP enters, rain dripping from the brim of his helmet. He holds a small canvas bag. Cigarette ration, he says simply. Setting the bag on the table, a few Germans drift over cautiously, still clutching letters from home. The MP steps back, arms folded, waiting. One by one. The prisoners reach into the bag. Carl takes a pack. Lucky strikes. He turns it over in his hands, weighing the absurdity. A full pack for him, not shared, not portered, not hoarded in desperation. Standard, routine, expected. The MP glances down at the letters scattered across the table. Something unreadable flickers in his expression's sympathy, maybe. Or awkwardness? You guys doing all right? He asks, hesitant. Carl looks up at him. Really looks. This man, this guard, barely older than his students, back in Freiburg, is not starving. Not exhausted. Not afraid. His uniform is clean. His boots are polished. He smells faintly of soap and tobacco. He lives in a world untouched by the shortages devouring Europe. We are... Carl starts, then stops. The word fine lodges in his throat, too false to force out. Instead, he says quietly, we are learning. The MP hesitates, unsure how to respond. Then he simply nods once and steps back outside. Leaving a trail of wet footprints the moment the door closes, Albrecht speaks. Do you remember the speeches? He asks softly. The radio? They told us America was weak, soft, lazy, that their society was crumbling, that their men were unfit for war. Carl nods. They said America could not sustain a long conflict. Albrecht continues. That their factories were inefficient, their soldiers spoiled. He gestures around the barracks. Does this look spoiled? Carl says nothing. His cigarette pack feels heavy in his hand. Outside, the rain grows louder, steady drumming that fills the silence between them. Albrecht folds his letter carefully and slips it into his coat pocket. "They fed us better than our own army," he says. "Do you understand what that means?" Carl does. He has understood since the train ride. This meat, chocolate, cigarettes, endless crates of supplies is not a trick. Not propaganda. Not a temporary abundance. It is the visible edge of something far deeper and more terrifying. Supply chains so vast it cannot be disrupted. An economy so large it barely notices the cost of war. A production machine that operates while Germany starves. Carl sits back on the bunk, staring at the Lucky Strike pack. His wife's words echo again. "Why is there so little here?" He whispers the answer aloud for the first time. Because America has everything. Silence settles over the barracks. Heavy and undeniable, no one argues, no one clings to the old lies, because today, the truth arrived in envelopes, carried across the ocean, and in the everyday luxuries their captors hand out. Without a second thought, Carl opens the pack and taps out a cigarette. He does not smoke it. Yet, he simply looks at it, a symbol of a world where plenty is normal and scarcity is unimaginable, a world that Germany could never hope to match. Section 6. A Tour of Normal America, March 29, 1945, somewhere near Hattiesburg, Mississippi. The engine of the army truck growls steadily as it rattles down a gravel road, spitting dust into the warm spring air. Carl sits on one of the wooden benches in the back, hands clasped loosely between his knees, the canvas tarp flapping above his head like the sail of a ship today. The Americans are taking a work detail outside the camp, something routine, something harmless, something he would not have thought twice about weeks ago until the truck slows, and he sees it at first. He thinks it is another factory, then it grows and grows and grows. Not a factory, a town bursting with life. Long streets lined with shoe stores, hardware stores, bakeries' windows, full of goods. Shelves stacked with items Carl hasn't seen since before the war, radios, bicycles, pots and pans. Leather boots displayed like works of art. People crowd the sidewalks, laughing, shopping, carrying bags stuffed with bread. Fruit, sugar, flour, fruit, actual fruit. A woman walks by holding a small paper bag of oranges. Oranges, in 1945. Carl's throat tightens. Germany hadn't seen oranges in years. Children run past the truck, kicking a rubber ball so brightly colored it seems unreal. Men in work clothes lean outside a diner, sipping cold sodas from glass bottles. Condensation beating down the sides. Cold drinks in March? A luxury. It would have sounded absurd anywhere in Europe. The truck passes a gas station. 3 pumps stand outside, each one gleaming. A sign reads, "Regular gasoline minus 18 per gallon. 18 cents, and not a crowd in sight. No ration line, no empty pumps, just fuel available." Everywhere an MP taps Carl's shoulder. "First time seeing a southern town, Captain?" he asks with a grin. Carl swallows. Yeah, the MP gestures out toward the street. "Pretty ordinary, huh?" Ordinary. The word hits Carl like a blow. Ordinary. This abundance, this casual overflow is ordinary. As the truck continues, they pass a grocery store. A signboard outside lists prices. Sugar, 5 pounds, 29 butter, minus 40 beef, 28 per pound coffee to 6. Per pound, Carl's eyes widen. Coffee, butter, sugar. 3 things that would cause riots in Berlin. He watches a pair of housewives push carts overflowing with cans. Fresh vegetables, sacks of flour, whole sacks of it. He had watched his mother tear ration coupons from a booklet, hands shaking, hoping the bakery wouldn't run out. Here. Flour fills the windows in piles. A small boy exits the store carrying 2 chocolate bars. One half-eaten, smeared across his face. Albrecht leans close. "Chocolate for children," he murmurs, voice flat with disbelief. In wartime, Carl can only nod. The truck takes a turn and passes a large warehouse with a sign. Distribution center. Workers roll crates down a ramp, crates identical to the ones delivered to the camp. Meat, sugar, coffee, tobacco, casually handled, casually stored, casually distributed, the way a wealthy household might treat firewood as they continue. The road opens into a rail yard. And here, the illusion of German propaganda collapses completely. Lines of freight cars stretch into the distance. Not 10, not 20, hundreds coal. Cars, boxcars, tanker cars, flat cars loaded with tractors, trucks, and more crates. A small switching locomotive shunts cars back and forth, its whistle singing a cheerful tune utterly out of place in the procession of realization. Unfolding inside Carl's mind, Albrecht grips the bench. Mein Gott, he breathes. It never ends. Carl thinks it never ends because there is no end. There is only more. More factories, more farms, more fuel, more trains, more goods. More than Germany could ever produce, even at its peak, more than the Reich could dream of in 1945. The truck stops at last between two long barns. The prisoners disembark, given simple tools, rakes, shovels, saws, and directed toward a lumber pile. The work is easy, almost embarrassingly so. Carl rakes pine needles into tidy piles, the warmth of the sun on his back, the scent of sap in the air. Birds chirp overhead. Utterly unbothered by the war raging across the ocean, an American supervisor walks over, sipping a bottle of Coca-Cola. He points to a spot Carl missed. "Right there, Captain." Carl bends, gathering the last loose needles. When he straightens, the supervisor holds the bottle toward him. "You want the rest?" "I'm done." Carl stares at it. The bottle is cold. Actual cold. Condensation beads roll down its neck. Slice of lemon floats inside. He hesitates. The supervisor shrugs. "Go on, plenty where that came from." Carl raises the bottle, takes a cautious sip, and the sweetness hits him like a memory of summer before the war. The fizz stings his tongue. The cold shocks his teeth. He lowers the bottle slowly, staring at it like an artifact. Coca-Cola, cold Coca-Cola, given casually to a prisoner, not propaganda, not performance, not generosity, just normal. He whispers, "Mein Gott." Albrecht, overhearing, walks over. His eyes narrow at the sight of the bottle. "They give their prisoners Coca-Cola now?" he asks, voice trembling between disbelief and resignation. Carl nods. Albrecht looks out toward the busy town beyond the trees, the stores, the trains, the warehouses. "This," he says quietly, "is why we lost the war." Carl says nothing. He doesn't need to. Because once you see a world where food is plentiful, fuel is cheap, factories are endless, and even a prisoner can drink cold soda on a warm spring day, there is no going back to the lie. Section 7. The day the sky itself proved the truth. April 9th, 1945. Camp. Shelby Training Airfield. The morning begins quietly. A thin mist hangs over the grass, turning the rising sun into a hazy orange disk. Carl is assigned to a work detail near the airfield fence, stacking lumber beside a line of new construction sheds. Albrecht stands nearby, measuring planks with the same rigid precision he once applied to artillery maps. The air smells of dew, pine sap, and something else, fuel, a sharp, metallic scent carried on the breeze. Carl straightens and looks toward the runway. Something is happening. The American MPs don't look concerned. They chat casually, passing a thermos of coffee between them. But the ground reverberates under Carl's boots, soft at first, then stronger. A pulsing tremor that rises from the earth like a heartbeat. Then he hears it. Distant engines. Many engines. One aircraft. No, two. Noah formation. A large formation. The low rumble grows into a cascading roar. The mist begins to tremble, vibrating in the engine wake long before the planes appear. A shout goes up from an American mechanic on the tarmac. Training group inbound. 35 bombers. 30-5. Carl turns to Albrecht. The older officer's eyes widen. The sound builds into a physical force. The fence rattles. Wood planks buzz in Carl's hands. And then the sky breaks open. In perfect formation, wings level. Intervals exact. A fleet of B-24 Liberators descends. Through the thinning mist. Silver bodies. For engines, each 12 guns glinting in the sun, they fly so low that the sunlight flashes. Off their propeller arcs like rotating blades of white. Fire. Carl's mouth goes dry. In Europe, a single bomber formation meant devastation. A single flight could erase a factory, cripple a rail hub, burn a city block into cinders. Here, 35. B-24s are simply training. Not mission, not emergency scramble, not maximum effort, just another. Tuesday, the first bomber passes overhead with a thunder that shakes every rib in Carl's chest. The next follows, and the next. They keep coming perfect, machine-like, endless. The ground crew waves them in. Their gestures are relaxed. Almost casual, an American corporal walks by carrying a clipboard. He glances at the sky and shouts to another mechanic. Morning group's early. Afternoon group's supposed to be bigger? Bigger. Carl feels dizzy. If this is only the morning wave. He grips the fence, knuckles white. The bombers circle, engines droning in synchronized harmony. One by one, they descend toward the runway, tires screeching as they touch down. Each aircraft taxis into position, wings passing over the heads of ground crews who barely bother to duck. Fresh crews rush forward with refueling hoses. Racks of bombs sit nearby waiting to be hoisted for drills. Trucks loaded with ammunition pull up. A group of pilots jogs toward a briefing shack, helmets under their arms, laughing about something Carl cannot hear. None of them look tired. None look hungry. None look afraid. They look like men going to work. Albrecht steps closer to the fence. Do you see the spacing? He mutters. And the coordination? This is not a show. This is routine. Carl nods numbly. Routinely building bombers, routinely fueling bombers, routinely training dozens, hundreds of crews. Every day, the last bomber touches down. Engines thundering as it slows. Another convoy of trucks rolls forward, this one carrying spare parts, tires, engines, propellers still wrapped in protective cloth. A spare engine alone would be a treasure in Germany. Here, they're stacked like produce at a market. Then, above the massive silhouettes of the Liberators, something else catches Carl's eye, glinting higher in the sky. Another formation, smaller planes, this time fast, agile, deadly. Deadly P-47. Thunderbolts, 12 of them, screech across the sky in a tight training pattern. They roll, dive, climb, leaving white scratches in the blue dome overhead. A second American soldier passing by whistles and says casually, "Busy airspace today, huh? This ain't even half of what we got at the main base." Half. Carl feels the world tilt. For years, he had been told that American pilots were clumsy amateurs, that their machines were overbuilt toys, that their production numbers were exaggerated. None of that is true. None of it. Not when 35 bombers and 12 fighters show up at a training field that isn't even major. Not when ground crews move with assembly line efficiency. Not when spare parts pour in from trucks like candy from a holiday. Parade, Albrecht whispers. In Europe, we send fighters only when we must. Here they send them just to practice. Carl doesn't respond because he finally understands something. Something that had been growing inside him with every chocolate bar, every crate of cigarettes, every grocery store. Overflowing with goods, war is not decided only by bravery, nor solely by strategy, nor even by discipline. War is decided by who can keep putting planes in the sky. And today, with the sunlight flashing off the wings of dozens of bombers and fighters, Carl sees the truth. America can put more planes in the sky than Germany can dream of shooting down. One of the MPs glances at the Germans, smirks, and says, "Impressive, huh?" Karl forces a breath. "Yes," he admits softly. "Impressive." But the MP shakes his head. "This," he says, waving a hand at the roaring runway. "This is nothing. You should see the big bases." Nothing. Karl closes his eyes. The sound of engines rumbles through his bones. The air vibrates with power. Oil fumes sting his nose. He opens his eyes again and watches another row of B-24s roll into place. "This," whispers, "is the sound of inevitability." Section 8. The moment of surrender, not on a battlefield, but in the mind. April 20th, 1945, Camp Shell Barracks 12. Night comes. Slowly in Mississippi, the humid air holds on to daylight longer than it should. The sky shifting from orange to violet as cicadas begin their metallic chant. The barracks windows glow faintly in the dusk, a warm amber light spilling onto the packed dirt outside. Inside, the posts sit at their bunks or stand in small circles, talking in low voices. The atmosphere is different tonight, less restless, less tense. A kind of heavy stillness hangs over the room. The stillness of men who have run out of ways to lie to themselves. Karl sits on his bunk, cleaning his hands with a rough towel. Removing the last traces of grease from the day's work, he still hears the bombers in his bones. That thunderous choir of engines turning war into mathematics. More planes equals more power. More power equals inevitability. The formula is simple, brutal, perfect. Albrecht sits across from him with a tin cup of Thai-real tea, not dried leaves swept from a warehouse floor. His hands tremble slightly, not from fear, but from the weight of understanding. "Do you know what today is?" the older man asks quietly. Karl shakes his head. "My birthday," Albrecht says. 48. He smiles faintly. "I never thought I would spend it in an American prison camp." Karl offers a tight smile. "Better here than at the front." Albrecht's smile fades. "Yes, better than the front. Or Berlin." Shadow crosses his face at the word Berlin. Neither man needs to say why. The city is dying. They both know it. Everyone knows it. A young lieutenant approaches them, his eyes wide and uncertain. "Herr Hauptmann," he says to Karl, "is it true?" "The guards say the Russians are in the suburbs of Berlin." Karl nods once. Slowly, a murmur rises across the barracks as the news spreads. For some, it sparks whispered prayers. For others, stunned silence. For others, still a different kind of silence. The silence that follows the collapse of the last pillar inside one's mind. The lieutenant swallows hard. "What will happen to Germany?" Albrecht answers before Karl can speak. "What always happens," he says softly. "When a nation fights a war it cannot afford." His voice is not bitter, not angry, not defeated, just truthful. The lieutenant sinks onto a bunk. Staring at the floor, Karl folds his towel and sets it aside. He can feel the moment, approaching like the slow descent of nightfall, one shadow at a time. The moment when a soldier stops being a soldier and becomes simply a man again. It begins with a sound. It's a faint rumble. Not engines this time, not bombers or fighters, but a familiar, gentle rhythmic clatter. A train. The barracks grows quiet as the rumble passes behind the camp. Rattling the fence, fading into the distance, a few POs wander to the windows. They see it. Boxcars, dozens of them, each stamped with American markings, each overflowing with crates food, fuel, machinery, clothing rolling past in the night like an artery carrying blood through the body of a giant. One PO whispers, "Another supply train." At this hour, another replies, "Do they ever stop?" Karl watches the cars rattle by, silhouettes framed by the moonlight. Even now, especially now, American war machine never rests. A guard at the doorway, overhearing the murmurs, says in accented German, "That train? Oh, we run 3 or 4 like that every day. Sometimes more." The barracks falls silent. Again, 3 or 4 trains a day, full of food, full of equipment, full Of everything a nation needs to wage war, Albrecht stands slowly. From his bunk, he moves to the center of the room. The other posts turn to him. Instinctively, old habits of rank and discipline. Lingering even here, his voice is quiet, almost reverent. I used to believe, he begins, that Germany could win because our soldiers were better trained, better disciplined, more driven. He pauses. But war is not won by spirit alone, nor by courage, nor even by strategy. He gestures toward the window, toward the fading sound of the train. War is won by this endless supply, endless production, endless capacity. The Americans. They are building war faster than we can fight it. No one argues. Not anymore. Karl feels something loosen inside him. A hard knot formed years earlier after Poland, after France, after Russia. A knot held together by pride, fear, indoctrination, duty. It loosens, untangles, falls away. Because now, after the meals, the cigarettes, the grocery stores, the bombers, the trains, he sees the truth clearly. Germany surrendered long before its generals ever. Will Germany surrendered the moment it chose to fight a war it could not. Sustained Germany surrendered to a nation whose factories outnumbered its divisions. Karl doesn't stand. He doesn't speak. He doesn't need to. He simply exhales a long, slow breath he has been holding for years. And in that silent breath, he lays down a burden heavier than his rifle ever was. War has left him. Or perhaps he has left the war. 1. POW near the window breaks the silence. What do we do now? Albrecht gives a small, weary smile. We wait, he says. We wait for the day the paperwork catches up to reality. The barracks remains quiet for a long time. Outside, the cicadas sing, an MP hums a blues tune, stars appear above Mississippi pine trees. Bright and indifferent, Karl lies back on his bunk, staring at the wooden ceiling in the distance. A final faint train whistle echoes across the night, the sound of a nation moving forward, while his own has run out of tracks. Section 9. When the Americans told them the war was over, May 8, 1945, Camp Shelby Parade Ground. The day begins like any other, humid, bright, heavy with the scent of pine and cut grass. The German POAs are lined up in formation, boots pressed into the dusty earth, the early sun glinting off the barbed wire fence. Karl stands in the front row. Albrecht stands beside him, arms folded behind his back, posture rigid despite the heat. None of them know yet. Not officially, but the guards. The guards know. They walk differently today, lighter, quicker, almost energized. Someone is whistling a tune Karl doesn't recognize. Another tosses a baseball into the air as he walks, catching it without looking. Eyes shining with some held-back secret. Then Captain Miller arrives, the same officer who greeted them in Alabama. Same crisp uniform, same calm voice. But today, the firmness in his eyes is softened by something heavy, something monumental. He steps onto a small wooden platform at the front of the formation and clears his throat. Gentlemen, he begins, his voice carrying easily over the open field. I have an announcement. The German ranks stiffen. A breeze rustles the flags. One American. One POW camp flag aside the platform. Miller looks at them. And for the first time since they met him, he hesitates. Not for uncertainty, but for gravity. As of this morning, he says, Germany has surrendered unconditionally to the Allied powers. The words hang in the air like a physical weight. No shouts, no gasps, just a stunned, hollow silence as if all sound has been sucked from the world. Karl feels his heart. Stop. Surrendered. Unconditionally. It is over. It is actually over, the officer continues. His tone solemn, but not celebratory. That means you are now prisoners of war, belonging to a nation that no longer exists in its wartime form. You will continue to be treated according to the Geneva Convention. Processing for repatriation will begin once we receive orders from Washington. A murmur ripples through the ranks, small at first, then growing. Like wind moving through tall grass. Some pose sag, where they stand. Some cover their faces with shaking hands. Some stare blankly ahead, as if unable to accept that the war they built their entire identities around has ended not with a heroic final stand, but with paperwork. Carl doesn't move. His eyes are locked on the horizon. The pine trees stand tall. Unmoved, utterly indifferent, he hears Albrecht whisper, "Ease is vorbei. It is over." Carl swallows, but his throat is dry. The surrender hits him in layers. First comes the relief immense, overwhelming, like air rushing into lungs long starved. Then comes grief. For the soldiers who died believing victory was possible. For the civilians suffering under ruins and ration cards for the Germany his wife had described, a country drowning under shortages and bombs. And then comes something else, a quieter realization, a truth he has carried silently for weeks now. The war ended inside him long before it ended on paper. Miller steps down from the platform. He does not smile. He does not gloat. He simply nods to the senior MP and leaves the field with the decorum of a man who understands the weight of history. The Germans remain in formation, unsure of what to do, waiting for some further instruction that does not come. Finally, the MP sergeant speaks. At ease, he commands softly, "Take your time." Men sink to the ground. Some cry, some bow their heads in prayer. One officer pulls a photograph of his wife and holds it to his chest. Weeping openly, Carl lowers himself slowly onto the dirt. His legs feel numb. Albrecht sits beside him, staring at nothing. After a long moment, he says, "I always wondered how the war would end for me. A bullet, a shell, an illness?" Carl nods. "But not like this," Albrecht continues. "Not in a place with warm meals and cigarettes and Coca-Cola. Not watching bombers train overhead as if the war meant nothing." Carl exhales, feeling the tension leaking from his shoulders. He remembers the chocolate, the factory city, the grocery stores, the bombers, the trains, the cigarettes, the soda, the sunlight across a peaceful American town. And finally, he understands the shape of the world victory was not a matter of courage, not a matter of spirit, not a matter of ideology. Victory belonged to the nation that could endlessly feed its soldiers and even its prisoners while building planes faster than its enemies could destroy them. He looks at his hands, hands once stained with mud from the Ardennes, hands once trembling on a rifle, hands once clenched. Around lies he had believed because he had nothing else to hold now. They shake for a different reason, because the truth is simple and devastating. They never had a chance. A gust of wind carries the faint smell of pine and fresh-cut grass. Somewhere beyond the fence, an American boy laughs carefree, unscarred by war. A baseball hits a mitt with a sharp smack. Life here has never stopped. Carl closes his eyes. For the first time in years, he lets the war go. Not because he wants to, but because there is nothing left to hold. Section 10. A final meal. In the quiet understanding of what won the war. May 12th, 1945. Camp Shelby Mess Hall. It feels different the moment. Carl walks through the door, not louder, not brighter, just different. The mess hall smells of the usual things: coffee brewing in metal urns, steam rising from mashed potatoes, the warm, almost sweet aroma of cornbread baked in black iron pans. But beneath it all is a quiet hum of anticipation. Tonight is the first meal served after Germany's official surrender, not celebration. The Americans are not cruel, not humiliation. They have never been petty. Just a meal in a war that is no longer a war. Carl steps into line beside Albrecht. The trays clatter in familiar rhythm as the men ahead of them move forward. The American cook behind the counter hares. The freckled one with the tired eyes sees them approach. He lifts a ladle and gives them a nod. "What'll it be tonight, Captain?" he asks. Carl blinks at the tray before him. Roast beef. Actual roast beef. sliced thick and glistening with juices beside it. Golden rolls brushed with butter, green beans cooked with bacon. A square of chocolate cake with dark frosting. Caked Carl stares, unable to hide his confusion. "You look like you've seen a ghost," Harris says, chuckling. Carl clears his throat. "Aye, it is much," he admits. "Not much," the cook replies, scooping beef onto the tray. "Just dinner, just dinner." The phrase lands like a stone dropped into a lake rippling outward, disturbing everything it touches. Carl takes his tray. Albrecht receives his. They walk toward an empty table near the back, where the light falls softly through the white. They sit, the mess hall buzzes with low conversation. Poe speak in hushed voices. Some still process the surrender. Some stare blankly at their food. Some eat mechanically, as if afraid the meal might vanish if they stop. Carl picks up his fork. He cuts into the roast beef. It is tender, rich, savory, the kind of meat German civilians haven't tasted in years. He takes a bite. The flavor spreads across his tongue, warming, comforting, almost foreign in its abundance. In his mind, he hears his wife's words again. Butter is almost impossible to find. Bread is rationed. The bombings grow worse. He sets down his fork, breath trembling. Across from him, Albrecht is staring at his cake knot, distrusting, not suspicious, but contemplative. "When I think of home," the older officer says softly, "I imagine my wife boiling potatoes again and again, stretching them with water, saving scraps of bread for the children." Carl nods. Albrecht lifts the fork and takes a bite of the cake. His eyes close. When he opens them again, something in them has broken in. Something else has settled quietly, solemnly into place. He says, almost in a whisper, "We lost because we starved." Carl looks around the hall. American soldiers eat at the same tables, only a few feet away. Their trays are filled with the same food, no better, no worse. Some joke loudly about baseball scores. Others complain casually about the heat. One bites into his roll and mutters, "Could use more butter," which makes the soldier next to him laugh. Carl watches them. Really watches them. These are not CPR men, not titans, not icons of propaganda. Just men. Men who go to war fed, clothed, supplied and supported by a nation that feeds. Everyone from the front lines to the training camps to the POW barracks without running dry. He looks down at his tray again. Roast beef, vegetables, bread, cake, not. Luxury, normalcy, powerful enough to reshape the world. He leans back, letting out a breath he didn't know he was holding. "You know," he says quietly, "I used to believe Germany had the strongest soldiers in the world. The toughest, the most disciplined." "You were not wrong," Albrecht replies. Carl nods. "But discipline does not fill ration tins, nor fuel tanks." Albrecht adds. Carl gestures slightly with his fork. "They won because they could afford to give their soldiers and their prisoners meals like this. Every day." Albrecht smiles faintly. "Yeah, every day. That is the part people will never understand." Carl's gaze drifts to the windows, where the sun is setting over Mississippi pines. Turning the world gold, he remembers the bombers. Overhead, the factory city, the sugar in the grocery stores, the gasoline, pumps with no lines, the overflowing crates of rations, the cigarettes handed out like pebbles, the cold soda on a hot day, and now, cake. He whispers, "This is what defeated us." Albrecht nods solemnly. A nation that fights war as if it is merely another industry. A nation too large, too rich, too efficient to starve. They fall silent. The mess hall continues, around them clattering trays, casual laughter, swing music faintly playing from a small radio perched near the kitchen door, and as Carl eats the last bite of cake, a strange, quiet acceptance settles over him. Not bitterness, not resentment, not shame, just understanding. Understanding. That war is never truly won on the battlefield. It is won in the factories, in the farms, in the rail yards, In the supply lines in meals like this, one ordinary, dependable, unremarkable, utterly devastating to an enemy built on scarcity. Carl sets down his fork. He feels lighter, not because the war is over, but because he finally understands why. Section 11. Packing up the war that never reached America. May 25, 1945. Camp. Shelby Storage Yard. The morning sun burns away the mist in a matter of minutes.
Ow.
Heat settles over the camp like a heavy blanket, thick and sticky. Wipes sweat from his brow as he lifts another wooden crate lighter than it looks and sets it onto a stack beside the storage shed. The crate is marked U.S. Armoration, Pack Type C-24, UNATS He. Swallows. 20-4 meals in one crate, easily carried in his hands, enough to feed a German squad for days, barely enough to impress Anne, its American quartermaster. In the past, a German officer might have looked at such a crate and calculated its military value. But today, Carl finds himself thinking only of the absurd contrast. In Germany, food was now more dangerous than bullets, more likely to determine who lived and who didn't. Here, it's stored like it doesn't even matter. Albrecht is sorting through a stack of tarps beside him, folding each one with meticulous military precision. His coat is off, his sleeves rolled up, sweat darkening the fabric across his chest. He glances at Carl, nodding toward the crates. "Look at these," he says. "Enough food for an army, all of it untouched." Carl runs a hand along the stenciled lettering. The wood is smooth, clean. It smells faintly of pine and machine oil. The American supply sergeant, overseeing the detail, strolls by, chewing gum idly. "Careful with those, Captain," he says. "We got more coming in this." Afternoon, Carl almost laughs. More rations, more crates, more food, always more. He feels the truth settle deeper into him, like the sun warming the dirt under his boots. America never felt the war, not the way Europe did. He glances at the horizon flat, peaceful, endless. In the far distance, a train. Whistle echoes through late morning humidity. The sergeant continues talking, hands on his hips. "Yeah, supply trains from New Orleans come through twice a day. Sometimes 3. Got more stock than we know what to do with." Carl cannot stop himself. He asks, "Why so much?" "The war is over." The sergeant shrugs. "We planned for longer, expected harder fighting. You never know with war." He gestures. Broadly, better to have too much than too little. Too much. Carl turns the phrase over in his mind. Germany had lived under the opposite philosophy for years. Albrecht finishes, tying down a tarp, and wipes his brow. "A strange thought," he says. "That the Americans prepared for a war bigger than the one they actually fought." Carl nods. "A stranger thought still that they never exhausted themselves." A group of American mechanics walks past, laughing loudly about something involving tires and a baseball bat. One of them tosses a wrench in the air and catches it without breaking stride. These men are young, healthy, fed, relaxed men. Will go home as if war were just a job they worked for a few years. Carl watches them go, unable to ignore the ache rising. In his chest, he remembers his own soldiers' boys from Freiburg and Stuttgart and Hamburg. Pale, underfed, marching in the snow with cracked boots and empty stomachs, living on hope and discipline alone. He closes his eyes. It is not envy. He feels it is mourning. Mourning for the difference. Mourning for the inevitability. A distant engine revs. Carl turns toward the sound. A convoy of American supply trucks rolls toward the yard, their tarps bulging with cargo. Each truck is heavy. None seem strained. The lead vehicle stops, its brakes hissing. The driver, a young man with sandy hair, leans out the window. "Hey, Sarge, where do you want the flour and canned goods?" "Flour, canned goods." The sergeant waves him toward the far shed. "Just stack them next to the last shipment." The last shipment? Carl's mind reels. There was a previous shipment of flour enough that it needed its own storage shed. Now, there is more, he murmurs softly. Do they ever stop bringing supplies? Albrecht hears him. They could supply 2 wars at once, the older officer says. Maybe 3. Carl doesn't answer. because he knows. He is not witnessing the tail end of a war economy. He is witnessing the beginning of a post-war world, a world in which the United States will step forward because it has the strength to step forward. The strength was never in the bombs, or the tanks, or even the soldiers. It was here in the quiet places, in the crates, in the warehouses, the trains, in the farms, in the factories, in the food. A soft-spoken American private approaches with a clipboard. "You boys finish?" "This row," he says, "and then you can break for lunch." "Special today meatloaf and peach cobbler?" Carl freezes. Peach cobbler. A dessert his mother made for holidays. A dessert he hasn't tasted in a decade. A dessert being served casually to prisoners of war. He feels the world tilt again, but not with disbelief now. With acceptance, deep, quiet, absolute acceptance. He looks at Albrecht. The older man nods, understanding without words. "We are prisoners," Albrecht says softly, "but in a country too prosperous for us to feel imprisoned." Carl places one final crate on the pile. It is lighter than he expects. The war is over. The burden has slipped away. The truth is simple. Germany did not lose because it fought poorly. Germany lost because America never ran out of anything. Not food, not fuel, not steel, not men, not hope. Carl brushes the dust from his hands. He is no longer thinking as a soldier. He is thinking as a man learning to live again. Section 12. The last lesson: what a POW learned about America. June 3rd, 1945, Camp Shelby Perimeter Road. The sun is low, melting into the tree line in sheets of gold. The day's heat lingers, caught in the sticky Mississippi air. Carl walks slowly along the gravel road inside the camp perimeter, a routine allowed under light supervision. It is not exercise, is not punishment. It is simply time to think. Albrecht walks beside him, hands behind his back, posture straight as always. Age has added weight to his steps, but dignity keeps them firm. They say officers will soon be transferred north, perhaps even repatriated once the Allied commissions finalize procedures. But today there is no talk of departure, only quiet footsteps. In long shadows, they pass a small vegetable garden tended by POs. Rows of tomatoes, squash, and beans reach toward the sun. The plants are healthy, almost impossibly so. Well-watered, well-fed, flourishing. Carl pauses. "These plants," he murmurs. "So much life." Albrecht nods. "The Americans insisted we plant them. For practice," they said. "For morale." Morale. Carl smiles faintly at the word. Such a luxury, such a concept. A word Germany used in speeches while America sustained it with food. They continue walking, the gravel crunching under their boots. Ahead, near the fence, a young American private, barely 20 seats, on a wooden crate, writing a letter. He looks up briefly, nods politely, and returns to his page. He is clean, relaxed. Whole Carl cannot help but imagine him returning home soon, back to a family that never stood in ration lines, back to a house that still stands, back to a life. Paused, not destroyed. The difference between the worlds they come from is a canyon no bridge can span. They approach the corner of the yard, where a small group of POS sorts scrap lumber for the camp carpentry shop. A radio nearby plays soft music from an American station, a sentimental tune, with a slow, steady swing. Carl slows, listening. He does not understand all the words, but the melody makes his chest ache with an emotion he cannot immediately name. "I used to love music," he says softly. Albrecht turns to him.
"Used to?"
Carl looks down at his hands. There was no room for music after Stalingrad, after Normandy, after the Ardennes, only surviving, only making it to the next day. Albrecht nods thoughtfully. "War steals many things," the older officer says. "But the Americans, they never seem to lose the small joys. Music, food, humor." He gestures toward the camp, the horizon, the sky. "This place is the first time I have seen peace in years. Peace. a word both familiar and alien. They walk again until they reach a small rise overlooking the far side of the camp barracks, supply sheds, mess hall, training grounds. Ordinary buildings painted in muted military colors, nothing grand. But the life inside them, the abundance inside them, has changed everything Carl understands. He exhales. "Do you know what confuses me most?" he asks. Albrecht raises an eyebrow. "That the Americans," Carl says slowly, "never wanted an empire." With all of this, he gestures to the wealth, the production, the effortless stability. They could have taken half the world. Albrecht smiles faintly. "That is exactly why they won," he says. "They were not fighting for conquest. They were fighting to end the war. A nation that does not need more land is unstoppable." Carl considers this, then he says something. He has never spoken aloud. "I resented them, deeply. I thought they were spoiled children. I thought their comforts made them weak." He laughs softly. "Now I see it was the opposite. Comfort made them confident. Security made them brave. Abundance made them patient." He gestures to the fence, "And all the while, we thought hunger made us stronger." Albrecht nods at the truth. A hard truth, a necessary one. A breeze picks up, carrying the scent of pine resin and warm earth. Fireflies begin to blink among the grass. For a long moment, neither man speaks. Finally, Albrecht places a hand on Carl's shoulder, a gesture of camaraderie that feels strangely paternal. "Remember this, Carl," he says. "Germany lost the war long before you and I ever stepped onto a battlefield. We lost when we chose to fight a world richer, larger, and more united than we could comprehend." Carl nods slowly. A weight lifts from him. Not entirely some scars. Will never heal, but enough for him to breathe deeply for the first time in years. They turn back toward the barracks as they walk. Carl notices a small detail, a crate near the road, filled with discarded wood scraps. Written on the side in fading stencil, "Us Propertino Special Va Luz Stops." He reads the words again. No special value. It was a crate of solid, American pine wood that would have been precious in Germany by now. Firewood for warmth, material for repairs, something to trade here. It is nothing. A container for scrap, something to be burned or discarded without a second thought. Carl looks at Albrecht. "This," he says, tapping the crate, "is the war. This is America." Albrecht nods solemnly. "They win because what is priceless to us is nothing to them." The sun dips below the trees, leaving a warm afterglow on the horizon. Lights flicker on inside the mess hall. The smell of dinner drifts across the camp, beef stew and fresh bread. Carl takes a deep breath. "Perhaps," he says softly, "losing is the first real freedom we've had in years." Albrecht smiles. "Perhaps," he says, "it is the first step toward becoming men again." Instead of soldiers serving illusions, they walk the remaining distance in silence, in the twilight for the first time since the war began. Carl feels at peace, not because he has surrendered, but because he finally understands what defeated him. Not America's fury, not its strategy, not its soldiers. Its abundance, its stability, its normalcy, its ability to feed everyone, even its enemies. Section 13, Final. Going Home to a Different Germany. August 2nd, 1946. Bremerhaven, Germany. The sea wind is colder than Carl remembers. Sharp, briny. It carries dust from the rubble-strewn shoreline, mixing with the smell of diesel from the transport ship that brought them across the Atlantic. Empty crates clatter on the dock. A gull cries overhead, circling the gray water like a sentinel guarding a ruined coast. Carl steps down the gangplank slowly, boots thudding against the wooden boards.
Ow.
His breath fogs faintly in the morning chill. Behind him, a line of German pose files down, an uneven silence, men who left their country in uniform and return now with only thin suit jackets and a small canvas bag of personal items. Albrecht comes down the ramp, a few steps behind him, moving with deliberate care. His hair has grown grayer. His eyes carry the weight of everything they saw in America and everything they did not see here. A British officer overseeing the disembarkation calls out instructions in clipped tones. The men are told to form lines, to wait, to prepare for processing. It's nothing unexpected, but around them, Germany awaits, or what is left of it. Broken walls jag upward like jagged bones. Streets that once held shops and bakeries are now blackened scars. Entire blocks have collapsed into tangled heaps of stone and plaster. Only the church steeple in the distance still stands stilted, cracked but defiant. Karl swallows hard. This is not the Germany he left. A soft voice beside him says, almost reverently, "Dies ist die Rechnung." This is the bill. Albrecht stands. With his hands behind his back, his posture stiffened by memory rather than rank, Karl nods. They walk slowly toward the processing tent at the edge of the dock, passing through what was once a bustling port, now turned half to ash. Karl feels the truth in every step in America. The war was noise on a radio. Here, the war is etched into the ground. A British sergeant stamps documents, returning identity. Papers one by one. When Karl's turn comes, the man looks at him with detached professionalism. Name: Karl Weber. Rank: Hauptmann. Former Hauptmann. Sergeant scribbles. Your cleared destination? Karl hesitates. Freiburg. The sergeant's face softens ever so slightly. Southern Germany's in poor shape. Just so you're prepared. Karl nods, though the warning is unnecessary. He has heard enough from returning prisoners, read enough in Red Cross reports, seen enough from the train windows last night. Entire towns rationing bread to crumbs. Families burning furniture for warmth. Cities lit only by candles. Children scavenging bricks from ruins. He takes back his papers and steps aside. Outside the tent, the Red Cross is waiting with thin blankets. Medical checks? And bitter coffee served from dented metal pots. A German volunteer, an older woman, in a patched coat hands Karl a cup. Her eyes are tired but kind. "Willkommen, Zurich," she whispers. "Welcome back." Karl grips the warm cup, letting the steam rise into his face. He wants to smile, cannot. Behind him, Albrecht emerges from the tent, straightening his coat. "Well," the older man says softly, "we are home." Karl looks around, at the collapsed buildings, the hollow faces. It's the hunger in the air so palpable it feels like a living thing. "No," he answers. "This is what remains of home." Albrecht absorbs this quietly, then nods. A long silence stretches between them, broken only by the wind rattling loose boards on the dock. Finally, Karl speaks. "I thought returning would feel like victory, or closure or something." "What does it feel like?" Albrecht asks. Karl takes a slow breath. "Responsibility," he says, "for what comes next." Albrecht considers this. "You learned much in America," he says. "More than most." Karl nods. Food, abundance, logistics, industry, normalcy. The things that truly win wars, and the things that now must rebuild Germany, not through conquest, but through patience, discipline, and the humility of starting again. He looks back toward the ship, the massive steel-bodied American vessel, dwarfed by the ruined harbor around it, in America. He had thought often about what defeated him. Now standing here, seeing what Germany has become, he understands something deeper. America did not defeat Germany. Reality did America, simply revealed it sooner. He sips the bitter coffee. It tastes like the beginning of something new, something difficult, something fragile, but something possible. A Red Cross worker approaches, handing them a slip of paper with temporary housing instructions. Albrecht tucks it into his pocket. "Will you be all right, Karl?" Karl nods slowly. "Yes, I think I will." They shake hands firmly, like comrades who shared a truth too heavy for words. Then, with final nods, they part ways across the broken dock. Karl walks forward. Into the ruins, the wind cold on his face. Every step feels strange. But real, he is no longer a soldier, no longer a prisoner, no longer a believer in illusions. He is simply a man moving toward a life that must be rebuilt from nothing but rebuilt, honestly. stripped of lies as he reaches the shattered street beyond the dock. He pauses and looks back at the sea one last time. The ship that carried him home sits silent, motionless, a reminder of a world that has already moved on. Carl whispers, "Never again," and turns toward the future.